Free plugins are hit or miss. Some well-known developers will put out a free plugin every once in a while to try to draw in new users. However, some independent developers work solely with a pay-what-you-want model, and in my opinion, they're the ones who are really pushing the most innovative and creative effects. So, if you're new to free audio plugins or you want to learn more about some of the best freeware creators, stick around as we cover the 3 best free plugin developers. So starting in alphabetical order, first up is AirWindows. I had heard about AirWindows for the longest time, but I always struggled to get the plugins running properly. Also, they've released hundreds of plugins, making it difficult to know where to start. However, Chris J, the developer behind the project, recently released a consolidated version, which works incredibly well on newer operating systems, and it makes installing and accessing the plugins a lot simpler. Not only does a single download and install get you access to a slew of free plugins, but you also get access to plugins that can't be found anywhere else. You get your basic filters, more or less traditional saturators, reverbs, and so on. But then there are the console emulations that mimic the voltage differences between analog channels and summing mixers, plugins that mimic how air molecules behave under intense sound pressure, a soft clipper that shifts the saturation point from the peak of the signal to a lower amplitude point in the waveform while retaining the peak. They're the type of plugins you don't know you needed until you start going down this rabbit hole of highly creative, one-of-a-kind effects. If you download the plugin, keep in mind that the collection is set to recommended by default. If you select all plugins, hundreds more plugins pop up. And as you might have noticed, the UI is incredibly simple. At most, each plugin has 4 to 6 parameters. For example, the console plugins, which I'm a big fan of, only include 2 parameters, the gain or fader and pan. Most of the unique processing occurs behind the scenes, and it requires a good deal of research to understand exactly what it does. You may have noticed that each plugin gets a massive description. Some of these read like blog posts, but each has helpful information about the plugin, what it does, and what's unique about it. So far I have 5 favorites I'd like to recommend. Macady, which emulates a vintage Mackie mixer, and it adds truly impressive punch and distortion to the signal. Console MC, which mimics an MCI console. Mastering, which is a subtle drive, compression, and tone shaping effect that I think improves the density of instrument buses. Clear Coat is an ambient reverb effect that brightens the source in a realistic and pleasant way. And lastly, Tube 2 is a tube emulation that has a realistic effect on the transients, and it introduces breakup similar to a tube amp. So let's take a listen to this drum track. It's an unprocessed track, aside from some level adjustment and subtle bus compression. We'll start with the original, compared to the same drums in which the subtle console MC plugin was used on all tracks. Then I'll introduce the Tube 2 plugin, and lastly, enable Clear Coat. Notice how these plugins don't have too much going on most of the time, but cumulatively, they offer an incredibly pleasant sound. Next up, let's talk about Analog Obsession. So Analog Obsession, like AirWindows, is run by one highly dedicated engineer. Unlike AirWindows, Analog Obsession plugins are a bit more transparent in what they do. They often, if not always, emulate a specific piece of hardware. These range from the well-known like the 1176, the LA2A, and Pultec EQs, to some of the lesser-known like Tree EQ, an emulation of a Trident console's EQ. They even expand on some of these units by adding multiband versions, like with Colin Multiband, a 3-band Fairchild compressor. Sometimes they simplify things like with Portec, a Pultec emulation that includes 2 filters for even easier tone shaping. And every once in a while, they come out with something surprising like MoMA, a machine learning-based saturator that imparts either even or odd harmonics, along with unique shaping to dynamics. My favorites include Tuba, a tube-shaped channel strip with a simple EQ section and some variable gain options like a pad and compensated low-high input values. The aforementioned Colin MB, which works incredibly well on drums since it achieves a sought-after thwack sound, if that makes any sense. And Portec, since when I'm using a Pultec EQ, I don't want high and low pass filters most of the time, I just want to gradually shape the lows and the highs. So if you were frustrated by how subtle some of the AirWindows plugins were during the last demo, you'll be able to hear the effects a bit better since I'll push them a little harder. So let's take a listen to Tuba, Colin MB, and Portec, introduced in that order. Make mixes that accurately translate what you hear in your head without years of practice or expensive plugins. Seriously though, when people work with us, they get results. That's why major industry professionals like Keith Urban's producer Aaron Schurz works with us, Grammy Award-winning AJ Castillo, Billboard #1 charted artist Megan Lindsay, Grammy Award-winning artist Toulis, The Voice singer Cody Ballou, Grammy-nominated producer Tyler Kane, Warner Music artist Ricky Young, and the list goes on. Why waste your time creating mixes that look like this when you can instantly fix the problem by working directly with professionals who have already done what you're trying to do? Watch this entire video, and at the end, learn how you can start making mixes that accurately translate what you hear in your head. Last up, before I cover some honorable mentions, we have a newer developer, Unplug Red. So Unplug Red is again just one developer. She's been making plugins for a few years now and has a completely unique style, both sonically and visually. Right when you pull up the website, you'll notice the early to late 90s aesthetic. If it was just a gimmick, I wouldn't really mention it, but this emphasis on design is worked into each plugin, and it's done really well. For example, at first glance, this Crumble Delay plugin seems kinda over the top until you realize that each function is represented visually. When I increase the delay time, the delay taps are spread out in tandem, and I can tell that I have 3 taps. If I increase feedback, more taps appear. The dry-wet changes the opacity of the taps, and reverse inverts the color scheme of the plugin, so you can quickly tell the current values of each function at a single glance, which is really smart. Already, this one developer understands how to make a comprehensive user interface that's more engaging and insightful than the majority of well-established companies. Similarly, Plastic Funeral, a distortion plugin, shows how the sine wave is being affected. Now, of course, how it sounds is the most important, but if you're getting acclimated to a plugin, knowing if it's creating a square wave, if it's processing the left and the right channels separately, and so on, is really helpful. Prisma is also really impressive. It's a 4-band distortion plugin that offers a wide array of options for the processing introduced. Each effect has a unique icon and color, so again, it makes it easy to quickly tell the settings at a glance. The crossover could be altered and is demonstrated up top. The bands could be muted, soloed, and bypassed, and importantly, it's a versatile plugin. It could be used subtly for bus processing, or used to completely destroy a signal, up to you. The last one I want to cover is called Sunburnt. It's a modulated reverb effect that gives you more control than any similar plugin. For example, I can determine the envelope of the reverb by dragging these points in this ADSR configuration. If I wanted to add more points, I can double-click. It can also change the envelope and behavior of other parameters. The default includes high pass, pan, low pass, and a shimmer effect, which alters the pitch. If I click the dot, more options appear. For example, I can modulate the density of the reflections. Finally, Unplug Red offers a super simple and helpful oscillator. If you ever want to see how a plugin is wave shaping a signal, say maybe the Oxford Inflator, run a sine wave through it and put this plugin on the output. So, all in all, these plugins are super impressive. They're not just unique in their design, the effects can't be found elsewhere and are really worth having, especially for creative mixing. Each one of these effects does a lot, so let's combine just 2 of them. I'll introduce some unique distortion with Plastic Funeral, and then heavily modulated reverb with Sunburnt. Let's cover some honorable mentions. So Tokyo Dawn Labs is a great developer that I wanted to include, but they haven't released many free plugins in a while. Molotok is still a fantastic plugin, as are many of their other free plugins like Kotelnikov, but releases are pretty few and far between. Also, Melda Audio offers a great library of free plugins. They're simple and easy to use with comprehensive output options and settings, but I see Melda Audio more as a traditional paid-for plugin company, since most of their plugins need to be purchased. Lastly, Tone Boosters is an amazing company. I'm also pretty sure that these plugins are made by just one person. That said, they offer an endless demo for all of their plugins, but it never really feels right to call their plugins free. I definitely recommend checking them out though, if you want a FabFilter style plugin that offers the same quality but at a lower price. Make mixes that accurately translate what you hear in your head, without years of practice or expensive plugins. Seriously though, when people work with us, they get results. That's why major industry professionals like Keith Urban's producer Aaron Schurz works with us, Grammy award-winning AJ Castillo, Billboard #1 charted artist Megan Lindsay, Grammy award-winning artist Toulis, The Voice singer Cody Ballou, Grammy-nominated producer Tyler Kane, Warner Music artist Ricky Young, and the list goes on. Why waste your time creating mixes that look like this when you can instantly fix the problem by clicking the link in the description and working directly with professionals who have already done what you're trying to do? We've helped 2,346 clients make mixes that accurately translate what they hear in their heads without years of practice or expensive plugins, and it'll work for you too. Click the link in the description and get direct access to us for custom analog mastering, one-on-one mixing feedback, in-depth mixing and mastering courses, and our thriving community. Click the link in the description now to start making mixes that accurately translate what you hear in your head.